If you'd like to open your Bible this morning, we'll be in the book of Numbers, primarily. We'll make our way from Numbers through a couple of other sections of the Old Testament. But we'll begin this morning in Numbers chapter 13. If you grew up going to Bible class, then there are certain stories and certain characters and figures who you may have had as personal favorites. And the figure that we're going to look at in detail today, I don't know that he was my number one favorite, but he certainly was, in the top 5 or 10. Because like any great, especially Old Testament figure, he had some pretty cool things that happened in his life that made for really good Bible stories and as a kid. But as you grow up and you mature in your understanding, there are other stories or other lessons to be taken from some of the stories that we learn from maybe our earliest age. And that's what I'd like for us to look at this morning, beginning in Numbers chapter 13. The way we'll go about it this morning is we're going to read a lot of Scripture. I'm going to skip sections strategically so that we can fit it all in on time today. So I'll do my best to tell you where I am in the text. But we'll begin in Numbers chapter 13, beginning in verse 1. It says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them." If we skip down to verse 17, in verse 17 it says, "Then Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said to them, Go up this way into the south, and go up to the mountains, and see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests or there are not. Be of good courage, and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes." If we continue in verse 26, it says, "Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Then they told him and said, We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large, and moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan." Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we." And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land, which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. And so we were in their sight." Continuing to chapter 14, verse 1. "So all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron. And the whole congregation said to them, If only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt?" So they said to one another, "Let us select a leader and return to Egypt." Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. But Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. And they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, "The land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." And all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Now the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of meeting before all the children of Israel. So a whole lot going on here in this section. But if you're, scrambling to pick up where we are in biblical history, the people have endured 430 years of Egyptian bondage. God has called Moses and appointed him to lead the people, free them from Pharaoh, walk across the dry bed of the Red Sea, and take them to the promised land, the land that was promised to Abraham. This generation should be the most excited generation of Israelites that there's ever been. They are going to inherit the land that was promised to their forefathers. Moses has led them. They've gone to Mount Sinai. They've gotten the commands of the Lord, and they're on the doorstep. They're right here. And they send this group of men into the land to report back on what it's like there. And that's where our story picks up this morning. We're going to be focused specifically on Joshua and a couple of highlights from his life, but this is how we meet Joshua. This is the very first time that we meet Joshua, here in Numbers chapter 13. And actually, we don't really learn a whole lot about Joshua until Numbers 14, because Caleb does the speaking on their behalf in Numbers chapter 13. But the first time that we pick up and learn from Joshua, we're right here. We're on the doorstep. We've made it all the way to the land of Canaan. And in the case of Joshua, we're one of the 12 people who get to go in and for 40 days scout out the land and learn about what it's like and bring this report back to the people. So 12 spies go out, but their report turns the people. The people are so excited to be here, right? The people are excited to go into the land until they get the report back from these 12. It's interesting that, sometimes we refer to these as the 10 with the bad report and the 2 with the good. But there's a lot of things about the report, like the facts of the report we see in the account, that all 12 of them agree on. They agree the land flows with milk and honey. They agree that the people are large. They agree that the cities are well fortified. Where they disagree is in what that outlook means for them, right? The 10 say the odds of us winning and actually eradicating these people feel slim to none. And land's not that great. It's not worth us losing our wives and our children, our own lives, and potentially becoming their slaves again, so we should just turn back and go elsewhere. The 2, Caleb and Joshua, have a difference of opinion, right? They seemingly point to the fact that God has promised this land to us. God is with us. There is no God or other God with these people who is going to defend them from us should we believe in God and trust in His providence that He's given this to us. But their report, 2 verses 10, is not enough to convince the people. And so if we continue reading in chapter 14 and pick it up in verse 32, in verse 32 it says, "But as for you, your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and your sons shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and bear the brunt of your infidelity until your carcasses are consumed in the wilderness, according to the number of days in which you spied out the land. 40 days, for each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years, and you shall know my rejection. I see the Lord have spoken this. I will surely do so to all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall be consumed, and there they shall die." Now the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation complain against him by bringing a bad report of the land, those very men who brought the evil report about the land died by the plague before the Lord. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive of the men who went out to spy the land. So, again, pretty famous Bible story. The people lack in their faith towards God, and they are turned away. Now, they are condemned to spend 40 years, 1 year for every day that they were in the land. They must pay a penalty of 1 year and wander in this wilderness. And while they wander, this entire generation will die. That's the point, right? Every person from this generation who turned against the Lord and doubted His power is going to die as a result of their actions that they've chosen to take. Save 2 men, Caleb and Joshua. When you think about where the people are on a timeline, I mentioned earlier, 430 years the people were in Egyptian slavery. From the time that they crossed the Red Sea So the time they sent the spies into the land is 2 years or less. So almost everyone who crossed over with water on both sides of them and left Pharaoh and left Egypt in the rearview mirror and saw the miracles that God performed to free them from Egyptian slavery, almost all those people are still here. They're the same people. Yet how quickly they forget who's on their side. Yet how quickly they doubt that this God could do the same thing to these strong people who they haven't even seen, right? There's only 12 of them who've even seen these people, but they're convinced that they have no hope and that in some cases we'd be better off if we never even left Egypt. We'd be better off if we were still slaves. We wouldn't have to face this issue we have here. And so on one hand, you think, have you ever been told something by someone and you have to take their word for it, right? That's kind of where the people were. They had to take the word of the spies who came back with the report. That's all they knew. They didn't go in with a digital camera and take some pictures and send it back. They didn't have a spy satellite to see how the people moved in and out of the city. They just had to take their word for it, right? And sometimes we say, well, take it with a grain of salt, depending on who it is who's speaking to you. But for whatever reason, they trusted the report of these 12 men, likely because they were leaders from their family. That's what Moses was called to do, was select a leader from each tribe to go and be these spies. So they should have been men who you trusted, right? And so the people trust their report, they trust their opinion that they can't conquer them, they can't conquer these people, and their lack of faith turns them away. So as we continue in the story of Joshua, let's turn to the book of Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy chapter 31, and as I said from the outset, for expediency, we're skipping over a few events. But in Deuteronomy chapter 31, beginning in verse 1, it says, "Then Moses went and spoke these words to all Israel. And he said to them, I am 120 years old today. I can no longer go out and come in. Also the Lord has said to me, you shall not cross over this Jordan. The Lord your God himself crosses over before you. He will destroy these nations from before you, and you shall dispossess them. Joshua himself crosses over before you, just as the Lord has said, and the Lord will do to them as he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites in their land, when he destroyed them. The Lord will give them over to you, that you may do to them according to every commandment which I have commanded you. Be strong and of good courage. Do not fear, nor be afraid of them. For the Lord your God, he is the one who goes with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Then Moses called Joshua and said to him, in the sight of all Israel, be strong and of good courage, for you must go with this people to the land which the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall cause them to inherit it. And the Lord said, he is the one who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear nor be dismayed." So this is the handing over of the leadership role of the people, right? Moses has led them these 40 years. He's led them out of Egypt. He's led them through the wilderness. But because of his own sins, he is not going to be allowed to go into the land, right? And so what he kind of gives to Joshua and to the people are these really strong words of encouragement. It's interesting how emphatic Moses is about the fact that God is going to deliver all these people into your hands, right? Don't forget why we've been walking around for 40 years. We've been walking around for 40 years because your fathers 40 years ago didn't think that God would give the people into our hands. Follow Joshua, trust in God, and they'll be delivered to you. And so Joshua takes over this leadership position of the people. And then if you turn just a few pages in your Bible to the book of Joshua itself, in Joshua chapter 1, beginning in verse 10, we'll see the people actually enter into the land. Joshua 1 verse 10 says, "Then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, saying, pass through the camp, and command the people, saying, prepare provisions for yourselves, for within 3 days you will cross over this Jordan, to go in to possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess." How exciting must this time be, right? 3 days. We are 3 days away. We are going to cross the Jordan. We are going to go in and possess this land. The land that was promised hundreds of years ago to Abraham. The land that we were standing pretty close to here 40 years ago and thought we were going to have, but we turned away. We're back. 3 days, make provision. We are finally going to go into the land which God is giving you and us to possess. In chapter 2, verse 1, it says, Now Joshua the son of Nun sent out 2 men from Acacia Grove to spy secretly, saying, Go, view the land, especially Jericho. So they went and came to the house of a harlot named Rahab and lodged there. And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, Behold, men have come here tonight from the children of Israel to search out the country. I don't know if everything in the Bible is meant to be, a parallel. There are a lot of parallels that you can draw from many different stories in the Bible. There are a lot of parallels that can be drawn from events in the Old Testament to events in the New Testament. There's a lot of symmetry to events that happen throughout the Bible. I don't know why Joshua sent 2 spies. It might be too far to say that Joshua sent 2, because there were only 2 good ones last time we sent some spies out to do something. But it is interesting that 2 spies are sent into the city of Jericho, right? And Jericho is set to be the very first testing point, if you will, of this conquest, right? Because we can't simply walk into a land and say, we're here now and it's ours, right? There's going to have to be a little bit more effort than that. That's what the people were afraid of 40 years ago. They were afraid of the effort it was going to take, because they can't just walk in and say, well, now it's ours. So Jericho is going to be the first point of contention as the people enter the land. And so the spies go in, and if we pick up the story in verse 9 says, And Rahab the harlot said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord, that is Yahweh, dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now therefore I beg you, swear to me by the Lord, since I have shown you kindness, that you also will show kindness to my father's house, and give me a true token, and spare my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from the death. So the men answered her, Our lives for yours, if none of you tell this business of ours. And it shall be, when the Lord has given us the land, that we will deal kindly and truly with you. So they go into this city. They go into the house of a harlot, right? Why do they go into the house of a harlot? Because it's a place where there's a lot of men of prominence trafficking through there, likely. It's a good opportunity to pick up intel in a city. But it's interesting that this woman, who we would objectively say is living in sin and is not, Jewish by birth or anything like that, she knows and believes in the power of their God. She knows and believes in the power of Yahweh. She knows the story of how this people crossed over and through the Red Sea. She says it herself. We know that He made it dry and that you passed through. That's 40 years ago. So likely that's a generation or 2 telling the story in this city that's hundreds of miles from Egypt. They're telling the story about this people and the God that they bring with them. The idea that the people are faint-hearted, that the people who are in this fortified city are scared of this group of Israelites who are coming towards them, it should be really impactful, right? Because again, the people themselves who've been with God and seen all the miracles of God, at many times in the story, they have doubted God's power. Yet the people that they're coming upon, they don't seem to doubt at all the power that their God brings. And so in verse 24 of Joshua chapter 2, it ends by saying, And they said to Joshua, Truly the Lord has delivered all the land into our hands, for indeed all the inhabitants of the country are faint-hearted because of us. Now, what a difference 40 years makes, right? The spies come back. Their report is a little bit different than it had been the last time spies were sent into the land. They're confident. You can feel it in their voice. Truly, the Lord has delivered all the land into our hands. And so the people have returned to Canaan. They send the 2 spies in. And this time, you could argue, their report strengthens the people. The people are excited. The people are confident. The people are ready to go to war. Let's do what it takes to defeat the city of Jericho and kind of get this campaign of conquest started. We're excited. And so they go in. In Joshua chapter 3 and Joshua chapter 4, they cross the Jordan and they prepare for battle against the city of Jericho. When you think about an army preparing for battle, right, there's physical preparations that need to be made, right? We've got to have weaponry, we've got to have horses or other animals, we've got to have, make sure we have provisions because it might take us a few days to conquer it. That, we need a plan. We put all these things together. Equally as important is the mindset of the people, right? You've got to be ready to go to battle. You've got to be ready to go to war. You have to have a certain mindset to go in and get the job done. And that's what these people are called to do. They place the memorial stones in the Jordan according to the commands of God in chapter 4. But we see them getting ready to take on this great fortified city. And so let's pick up the story of Joshua in Joshua chapter 5 and verse 13, when Joshua is greeted by a visitor. In Joshua chapter 5, verse 13, it says, "And it came to pass, when Joshua was by Jericho, that he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, 'Are you for us or for our adversaries?' So he said, 'No.'" It's an odd response. Are you for us or against us? No. "No, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped, and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" Then the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take your sandal off your foot, for the place where you stand is holy." And Joshua did so. So this is an interesting and auspicious visitor to get when you're preparing for battle. The commander of the Lord's army is here, speaking to you directly. Let's hear what he has to say. In chapter 6, "Now Jericho was securely shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out, none came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, 'See, I have given Jericho into your hand, its king and the mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city. All you men of war, you shall go around the city once. This you shall do 6 days, and 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. But the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. It shall come to pass when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, that all the people shall shout with a great shout. Then the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, every man straight before him.' Then Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, 'Take up the ark of the covenant. Let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord.' And he said to the people, 'Proceed and march around the city, and let him who is armed advance before the ark of the Lord.' So it was, when Joshua had spoken to the people, that the 7 priests, bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Lord, advanced and blew the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. The armed men went before the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard came after the ark, while the priests continued blowing the trumpets." So all this preparation, all this, for 40 years thinking about what have we done wrong, all these people dying in the wilderness, for this opportunity to come back, for this opportunity to enter the land now. Now it's time to go into the land. So we know we're hardened, we're ready, we're going to have to, win some battles along the way. Let's get ready for the very first one. And Jericho's not a pushover to have for the very first one. So we draw up these plans. We get ready. We go through all the preparation that it takes. And great news, the Lord has given us the battle plan that will win. Well, the battle plan that will win isn't really fighting, at least not on the surface, right? The battle plan that the Lord delivers is to walk around in a circle around the city. To do so in a very specific way, but at the end of the day, it's to walk around in a circle around the city, right? For a week. For a week, that's all we're going to do. We're going to be open to fire, right? You got to think, high wall city. These people are scared. They think we're coming to attack them. They could lob stuff at us. Maybe they have bows and arrows. They could start to attack us while we're walking around. We're just going to walk once a day for 6 days. On the seventh day, do it bigger than we've done the rest of the week, right? That's the plan. That's the whole plan. But it's impressive when you read the story to see just how seemingly confident the people are in Joshua telling them this. Again, another example of trusting the person who's telling you what to do, because how many people did the commander of the Lord's army speak to? He spoke to one. He spoke to Joshua in the account that we're given, right? Joshua disseminates this plan to the people, and the people execute it. In fact, they execute it flawlessly, as we'll see as we continue in the reading. They do exactly as they're instructed to do. Perhaps this generation learned something. Perhaps this generation, learned the lesson that God was instructing them with when they spent the 40 years in the wilderness. Also, perhaps Joshua was a good leader, right? Perhaps Joshua's faith in God, which we've seen a few times at this point, and his confidence in what he said, is invoking that same confidence in the people who are following him. But one way or another, these people seem to be a little bit more engaged, a little bit more confident in the God who they should be serving, and the God who's on their side. So continuing in the reading in verse 10, it says, "Now Joshua had commanded the people, saying, 'You shall not shout or make any noise with your voice, nor shall a word proceed out of your mouth until the day I say to you, shout. Then you shall shout.' So he had the ark of the Lord circled the city, going around at once. Then they came into the camp and lodged in the camp. And Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. Then 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns went before the ark of the Lord. It went on continually and blew with the trumpets, and the armed men went before them. But the rear guard came after the ark of the Lord, while the priests continued blowing the trumpets. And the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. So they did 6 days. But it came to pass on the 7th day that they rose early about the dawning of the day and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner. On that day, only they marched around the city 7 times. And the 7th time it happened, when the priests blew the trumpets, that Joshua said to the people, 'Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. Now the city shall be doomed by the Lord to destruction. It and all who are in it, only Rahab the harlot shall live, she and all who are with her in the house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. And you, by all means, abstain from the accursed things, lest you become accursed when you take of the accursed things, and make the camp of Israel a curse, and trouble it. But all the silver and gold and vessels of bronze and iron are consecrated to the Lord. They shall come into the treasury of the Lord.' So the people shouted when the priests blew the trumpets, and it happened when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat. Then the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city, and they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, ox and sheep and donkey, with the edge of the sword. But Joshua had said to the 2 men who had spied out the country, 'Go into the harlot's house, and from there bring out the woman and all that she has, as you swore to her.' And the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all that she had. For they brought out all her relatives and left them outside the camp of Israel. But they burned the city and all that was in it with fire. Only the silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. And Joshua spared Rahab the harlot, her father's household, and all that she had. So she dwells in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Then Joshua charged them at that time, saying, 'Cursed be the man before the Lord who rises up and builds this city Jericho. He shall lay its foundation with his firstborn, and with his youngest he shall set up its gates.' And so the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout all the country." So, great opening act for Joshua. Now, granted, we know Joshua's been around for 40 years, but that's a pretty big entry, right? You come into the land, you defeat these people without really even attacking their walls. You utterly destroy them and everything they have. It's a pretty strong first impression for all the people who are around in the other cities, right? That now have to fear this group who is coming towards them. There's obviously several other tangential stories off this. We think about in chapter 7 what happens when we discover the sin of Achan, right? Coming off of the victory at Jericho. We think about, as we studied on Wednesday night, in the time of King Ahab, 500 years later, someone will rebuild Jericho, and they will pay the price that was put forth here by Joshua in this curse. But for the time being, the people have won a great battle. But again, just like we learned in Bible class, the way in which they won it is the most interesting thing, right? The idea that these people encircle a city and win this victory without really attacking it at all. Undoubtedly, the Lord was with them. In fact, the angel of the army of the Lord comes to Joshua and gives them the plan, and that's the plan that they execute. For, the first time in a long time, you could argue, the people were obedient. They did exactly what was told for them to do, right? There's a lot of other times in this period, from the time Moses started leading the people, and there'll be a lot of times after, see chapter 7 in the sin of Achan, where they don't follow everything that the Lord has asked them to do. But in this case, they seemingly follow the instructions of the Lord and of Joshua to the T. And ultimately, their victory was delivered by faith. The Lord specifically had them attack the city of Jericho. Attack, in air quotes, the city of Jericho in this way, I believe, because he wanted to prove a point. He wanted to prove a point that it's not that the Israelite army is this great, powerful army. It's not that this Israelite army has some new weapon that you've never seen before. It's not that this Israelite army has such a numerical advantage that they're going to swarm and overwhelm every city that they come up against, right? What the army of the Israelites has, that no one else has, is they have Yahweh. They have this God who, by providence, has given them this land and who is fulfilling his promises to them in delivering this land. In Hebrews chapter 11, it says quite clearly, by faith, in verse 29 of Hebrews chapter 11, by faith the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land. But the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. And by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. Right? Why did it happen? It was purely by faith. It was by the faith of the people demonstrating their belief in God. And so, in what has been 25 or 30 minutes together, we've made it through 40 years of Israelite history, and our first 40 years of Joshua. And so it's probably time to bring a couple of applications for all of us today. The first application and lesson for each one of us that I think we can take from the way in which we meet Joshua is more about the people that Joshua was a part of. We are a forgetful people. We are not unlike the Israelites in that way. We make a lot of fun of the Israelites in the way that they seemingly forgot. We make a lot of fun of the fact that you saw the plagues that God carried out against Egypt and against Pharaoh. You saw the miracle by which you were delivered across the Red Sea and the providence of God. This very generation, in the last 2 years, you saw that. But the first time that you run into someone who's a little taller than you, you doubt the ability you have in beating them in battle, right? We see this throughout the Old Testament, that the people are called to remember. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 2, it says, "And you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not." Right? This is God saying, this is why you're going to walk around for 40 years. You're going to walk around for 40 years so you can't forget. Because you couldn't remember for the 2 years that we went from Egypt to the land. In 1 Corinthians, the verse that we typically, I believe it was on the screen this morning as we prepare our minds to the Lord's Supper, right? We talk about when the Lord's Supper is instituted, why does Jesus say to do this? Do this in remembrance of me, right? I firmly believe one of the reasons we're called to do it every first day of the week is because God gets it. We are a very forgetful people, and we would undoubtedly forget what God has done for us if we weren't called to remember it so frequently, right? And yet we still forget from time to time. So I think it's important for us to understand that's part of human frailty. That's part of the imperfections of this physical world. Is we are a forgetful people. The second kind of lesson that I think we can take from this is that we should appear conspicuous. We should look different. We should behave differently. We should be the people. I'm not saying that people need to cower in fear when you walk into a room in the same way, but the way in which Rahab understood who the God was that people served and who that people had with them should be, in some ways, the way people think about you and I today, right? When we look in Matthew chapter 5, in the Sermon on the Mount, in verse 14, Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Right? We're called as Christians and as people of God that we should stand out. There should be this light that emanates from us, and others should see him by our works, but we should look different. The people, when they came to the land and prepared to take Jericho, they looked different. They had a couple of stories in the bag from what they'd done on the other side of the river already, but the people were afraid. The people understood who the God was that was on their side, and I think that's something that we can take away as well, is that we should, our faith in God should make us appear a bit conspicuous to those around us today. And the last one, which could be a layup for just about any sermon that's presented, right? But God keeps his promises. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9, it says, "Therefore know that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and mercy for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments." Right? Again, this is after the people have been condemned to walk in the wilderness for 40 years, and this entire generation is going to die off as a result of their unfaithfulness. But he wants to call them. It's like, look, the Lord is going to keep his covenant. The covenant he made with Abraham, he's going to keep. And he does, right? It's just going to take a little bit longer because of your behavior, right? But that's the same God that we serve today. The same God who promised this land to Abraham is the same God that we serve today. And he has the same approach to his promises. They may or may not happen immediately, as we see throughout the Old Testament, but he will fulfill his promises. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 9 says, "God is faithful, by whom you were called into the fellowship of his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord." Right? That's the faith that we should know and that we should have confidence in today as Christians. That if we've been called into Christ and taken on Christ in baptism, that God is faithful to remember us, that God is faithful to save us in the end if we've been found faithful. There's obviously a lot of other things that happen in the life of Joshua, a lot of other stories that have great applications for us. But it's interesting to me when you think about the story of the spies, and Joshua being one of those 12, right? And how we learn that from such a young age. And then we think about the people wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And again, how we spend a lot of time on that in Bible class. And then we think about the great story of Jericho and how the people believed in God and this victory was handed to them. It makes a fantastical story for little kids. But there's a lot there for each one of us to glean and take note of in our walk every day as Christians.
I will praise you with all of my